I want to welcome everybody here tonight to two very fine speakers. We have Mayor Calvin Tillman, the mayor of Dish, Texas, who has spent the last few years of his life trying to regulate natural gas companies that are drilling down in Texas in the Barnett Shale area. And it's obviously a courageous thing that he's been doing, because back in northern Texas, I'm sure they think that that's the greatest thing you can do down there, is extract the gas. He's been touring many areas, and I had the privilege of seeing him last year in Clark Summit, and it was a very good talk. Basically, he's making people aware of the potentials of natural gas drilling in communities. If you remember, Dish, Texas is the town that got their name for free, or they got satellite TV for free by changing their name to Dish. I'm not sure what the name was before the Dish. It's a town consisting of 200 residents and 60 gas wells. And I understand that when Mayor Tillman's sons woke up in the middle of the night with mysterious nosebleeds, he knew that it was time to move, even if it meant leaving his community behind. Apparently in Dish, Texas, they have 4 metering stations, 11 compressor stations, and over 20 pipelines in less than 2 square miles. And him, along with our second speaker, Tim Ruggiero, is a founder of Shale Test, a foundation that performs environmental testing for low-income families of air, water, and soil. Tim also got involved when he met Calvin, and also when he had a little bit of a disagreement with Aruba Petroleum, who without notice cut down his $15,000 fence and bulldozed 3 acres of his property. And because of that, he has had some problems with Aruba ever since. And I know that he was attending meetings in Dish, Texas, where he hooked up with Calvin, and both of them have been speaking in the Marcellus Shale area recently about some of the problems with people's drinking water and their land and health problems. Tim also saw that our local agencies, such as the DEP and the Texas Environmental Quality Board and Railroad Commission, haven't really been doing much to protect the people. So working together, they created Shale Test, and they've been trying to educate us all. And that's what Gas Drilling Awareness Coalition is about, is educating people. And if you find that this talk stimulates you a little bit to get more involved, we have a lot of local things happening. We have a sanitary authority down in Hanover that wants to put a frack treatment plant and bring 576 trucks 24/7 to and from the frack treatment plant to unload their toxic chemicals. And we also have Williams and Chief gas companies and gathering lines looking to put pipelines and metering stations up in Dallas, not too far from the high school and the elementary school. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Calvin and Tim to our, if you want to give them a nice applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the warm reception. Thanks for the use of the facility here. It's a very nice facility. One of the things that we're going to want to talk a little bit about today is Shale Test, the organization that we just formed last fall. We're kind of releasing it into the Marcellus this week. But before we really get in deep into Shale Test, Tim's going to come up and tell you a little bit of his story, and I'll tell you a little bit of mine. Just a quick overview of what Shale Test is all about. Testing is very important if you're going to get anything done in an area that has had some problems, and we've found that through our experiences, and we've also found that a lot of times these problems don't happen in real affluent areas. They happen in the more economically depressed areas, and those folks just simply can't afford to have expensive environmental testing done. And so we formed Shale Test last fall, and we released it down in Texas, and we've been putting everything together. And so now we're going to come up here, and because we know that people up here need it as well. And so we conduct environmental testing at large and complex natural gas facilities. We provide environmental testing for lower income families, and we establish the baseline air and water testing, retest air and water after drilling has occurred. That's what our goals would be in a perfect scenario, and hopefully we can do that as much as we can. a little bit about myself. I certainly never thought 10 years ago that I would be up in front of people talking. I didn't think I would be a mayor of a small town. Certainly didn't think I would be involved in politics at all. I grew up in a little small town in Oklahoma called Jennings. Jennings is in the middle of the Oklahoma oil fields. My father, when I was a young child, worked on the weekends on the pump jacks out in the oil fields to make extra money. So I more or less grew up around this. So when I moved to Texas, when I moved to the Dish area, I wasn't that big of a deal. I'd grown up around it. And so I got a real education. And I'll tell you a little bit about our story here in just a few minutes in Dish. And but first we'll let Tim come up and talk. In the back of the room there's some photos and there's some flyers and some handouts, and we have some shaletest.org hats, and we have a suggested donation of $25 for one of those. And Frank Finnan is back there with the shaletest.org hat on. Tim is going to tell you his story, and he's got a very compelling story. And when Tim was affected, and you start doing any searching around on the internet, you're going to find Dish. And so Tim started coming to our city council meetings, and he was very vocal and very outspoken at our city council meetings, and he was frankly more attended more frequently than a lot of the citizens in Dish did, because he wanted to learn about what was happening to him, because his whole life changed. And so me and Tim got to talking and became friends, and he's joined me on a couple of other speaking events, and then we ended up co-founding Shale Test. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask Tim to come up and tell you a little bit about his story. So please welcome Tim Ruggiero.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to first say I really appreciate you folks coming out tonight, giving up a couple hours out of your evening to come spend with us. I hope some of the things that you see tonight will be eye-opening to you. And I usually finish my presentation with this, but I think in this particular case I'm going to start. As being from Texas, a gas and oil state, we've had gas well drilling and oil drilling for decades, and it is one of our, Texas's claims to fame. What I would want you to understand, if you walk away from this meeting tonight with understanding one thing, is that what you're about to see tonight is your future if you do nothing more than come out to this meeting tonight. If you walk out of this meeting tonight and say, yeah, that Tim guy, I really feel for him, what are we having for dinner? If it doesn't go beyond that, if you don't get involved and get your information from somebody other than the guy that's trying to convince you that having a gas well or a metering station or a pipeline running through your backyard or your front yard is a great idea, then you will have missed the value of the information that we have here tonight. I was originally born in Plum, small little town outside of Pittsburgh. I was born and raised there. We left when I was 13. I spent the better part of my adult life in Texas. What you're seeing here, I'll try to get out of the way a little bit. This was the view out of our kitchen window for more than 2 months. That drill rig is 300 feet high, and it is exactly 300 feet from our back door. And the reason that it is 300 feet is because if it falls over, they don't want it to fall on our house. As if that was the only potential problem that we could have. I share our home in the small little town with my wife Christine and our 11-year-old daughter Riley. As a Christmas present to her a couple of years ago, we got her this horse. The horse's name is Nina, and my wife grew up with horses and just thought that it would be really cool that if she could share her love of horses with our daughter. What you can see here in the background, just barely, on the other side of that fence is a pond, and on where the tree is, under where it says Ruggiero, is where Aruba Petroleum first set up a drill rig on my neighbor's property. This is our second horse that we got. Her name is Sweetheart, with my wife Christine. And that tree, that overgrown tree, the mesquite tree in the background out there in the middle of this horse pasture, right about where that tree is where Aruba set up the drill rig on our property. This might actually look like a beach from, the Bahamas or something. It's actually a 4-acre gravel pad. It used to be our horse pasture. What you can see in the background there is the horse barn that leads, that we designed specifically to lead out to the horse pasture. It now leads out to a drill pad. We spent a little more than $10,000 building that horse barn, and now it has been virtually rendered useless. Notice how happy the horses are out there in that horse pasture. This is my daughter, Riley. She was 9 years old at the time, playing in her sandbox that we have set up in the backyard. And in the background, you can see the drilling operation with the drill rig. You can also see as a couple of things. One is that that big screen they have up, they refer to that as a sound barrier. It's about 10 feet. It's about 10 feet too short, and it's about 30 yards too thin on the left side. What was kind of interesting to me is that they kept referring to it as a sound barrier. But the problem is that the sound came from above on the drilling rig than where they have the screen, so it was virtually useless to us. This is an aerial view of our property. You can see where our home is. Down in the bottom, kind of down bottom left-hand corner, you can see that L shape is where Aruba decided to put in the pipeline. I had the landman approach me long after the drilling operations had started and said, the lease calls for you to be paid 50 cents a foot for the pipeline, but since we want to be your good neighbor, we're going to pay you $10 a foot. So that would have amounted to about $7,000 if I had said yes. I actually said no, and they put it in anyway and have paid us nothing for that. Out in the foreground, up towards the top, you see that trench. You can see how saturated the ground is in front of that. That is largely overflow from the waste tanks. That ground down there is actually on my neighbor's property. You can see she has quite a bit of acreage down there. She has about 110 acres or so that she grows hay on. And that whole area down there, there's still virtually nothing that grows. You can see that white patch right there in the middle. Our property line, you're going to see it in another slide or so. Aruba has basically set up on that what is entirely in that white picture. That's mostly all the white gravel that they put in for the pad. This is the outline. You can see that black line that runs around the property. That's our where the property line is. You can actually see the horses in what's left of the horse pasture that they left for us in comparison to the amount of property that they originally had as a pasture. And you can see there's 4 condensate tanks and a frac tank on the far, I guess on the top side there. 2 tanks hold what they call produced water, which is nothing more than just a fancy or a polite way of saying toxic water. And the other 2 tanks contain condensate, which is a light oil. On March 16th of 2010, the condensate tank started overflowing and gushing out a very thick vapor of condensate, and it overflowed for more than 12 hours before Aruba was able to come out and shut it off. If somebody had come by on that road that you see there and had flicked a cigarette, so much as a cigarette out the window, probably would have blew the whole place up. This is what you would see as you approached our home. As you can see that right there in the front there is what used to be our $15,000 pipe and cable fence. We put that up to contain the horses, and Aruba decided that it did a great job of protecting all of their rusting and leaky equipment. And the pipe and cable fence still remains. They actually cut a 100-foot section out of it and to let in the bulldozers, and then they attached a gate onto it so that they can have the trucks and the heavy equipment come in. Aruba Petroleum showed up on my property without notice and without even so much as a permit. And because of the fact that I had the audacity to go over and complain to them because they had set up a drill rig on my elderly neighbor's property, they decided to be juvenile about it and actually waited for my wife and daughter to leave for school before cutting down the fence to start bulldozing the property. State law dictates that they are to give us 14 days written notice. And I guess the fine for failing to do that must not be very much, otherwise I would have to assume they would have complied with it. This is the same drill rig. In fact, if I can, I was just going to go back. Well, we can stay here for just a second. You can see as there's heavy diesel smoke coming off of this. There's a big blast of diesel smoke that came out of that drill rig from the diesel generators. We used to see that. It used to come out and burp out about every 2 to 3 minutes. You can see the big cloud up there in the sky, but also down at more towards the bottom. It actually kind of blends in with the trees. Is the big blast of diesel. We have jumped up and down and complained to the TCEQ a number of times, which is the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They are akin to Pennsylvania's DEP, and they're about as efficient and as effective as the DEP. When we had air testing done by the TCEQ did an air test, and the results of the air test showed that there was 380 parts per billion of nitrogen oxide coming out of these rigs every hour. Now, to put that in perspective for you, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard calls for us to be exposed, all of us, to be exposed to nitrogen oxide of no more than 53 parts per billion in a year. Doing the math, that means that our family and our neighbors that are around us were exposed to more than 10,000 years worth of nitrogen oxide in 2 months period of time. Nitrogen oxide grows cancer. Aruba's reaction to the complaint and our emails to them outlining this, we had done some research on nitrogen oxide, had actually sent them some reports. One of them was nitrogen oxide grows cancer. Aruba's response to all of this was, the rig will be down in a week. They did take the rig down in about a week, and they moved it a mile down the road and started doing this to my neighbor. This is a view of the drilling operations from our backyard. Again, you can see that diesel blast that comes out. My daughter's trampoline and her play area are less than 300 feet from where this was. On October 29th of 2009, you can see down there it says where the drilling mud blowout site. They, since they're so professional, they left a jet unattended, and they lost control and actually had a drilling mud spill. The drilling mud is supposed to go into that waste pit, and instead, since they left the jet open, it actually shot out across the waste pit and saturated my property. And I'm actually up on a little bit of a grade, and so a lot of the material actually ran down onto my neighbor's property. By law, under state rule, any spill, leak, accident, or fire is to be reported to the TCEQ immediately. And then the language of the law, the word immediately is in capital letters, italicized, and underlined, and in bold. Now, I think most of us have the same definition of the word immediate, which means right now. Apparently, Aruba's definition of immediate is sometime after we figure out how to cover this up, because they didn't report it. We reported it. This is another attractive view. This is actually, I took this picture at the top of our driveway. This is how close, to give you an idea, this is how close the drilling rig was to what my family was exposed to on a daily basis, just leaving the house to leave for work and school. Natural gas well development, by anybody's standard, is a dangerous business. It is inherently dangerous business. It is dangerous for the men that work out on these rigs, and it's dangerous for the people that are forced to live next to it. These guys that are up here working on it are working on that drill rig of their own free will. If that's what they want to do for a living, I will not get in their way. I have a serious difference of opinion that they should be able to expose my child to this activity. The closer these drill rigs are and these drilling operations are to our homes, our churches, our synagogues, our parks, and everything else where people congregate, the greater the risk is to human health. It is not a question of if something goes wrong, it's a question of when. This is a shot of what is now known as fracking, and I would tell you that probably less than 2 years ago, if you had used the word fracking in my presence, I would probably want to wash your mouth out with soap. What you see here, this big white cloud of what they refer to as sand. There is some sand in it. It's a very fine sand. It's actually so fine, it's actually more like silica. It is an inhalation hazard. You can get, there's a lot of nasty things associated with this very type of activity. Our neighbors, who are also elderly that live just on the other side of us, all of that white smoke and silica, they were exposed to that virtually 24 hours a day for more than a week when they were doing the hydraulic fracturing. And this next slide is just to the right of that slide, and you can see where that truck is. The folks' home that I'm referring to are about 50 feet, 50 yards or so to the right of that truck. We have, again, made a number of environmental complaints to the TCEQ. The TCEQ came out, looked at this, and decided that there were no violations. After a number of complaints, just from us, there have been hundreds of complaints. Now, I want to back up for just a second and let you know that Aruba Petroleum is probably one of the smallest operators there are on the Barnett Shale. They only have about 200 wells that they claim out of the some 15,000 that are on the Barnett Shale. They do, however, their number one claim to fame is they have more violations and more complaints than virtually all the other operators combined. And that's taking into consideration we have Devon and Chesapeake and Range Resources and a number of other operators. At one point in time, one of the violations that occurred was when we had a frac tank hooked up to the wellheads, and to release some of the pressure, they had popped one of the hatches and let out this enormous methane leak. It was a mixture of methane and other gases. It tested for 168 parts per billion of benzene. If you know anything about benzene, we should not be exposed to any more than 1.4 parts per benzene in that situation. This was Aruba's response. Aruba is committed to maintaining oil and gas industry standards. We have taken and will continue to take steps to ensure our operations do not adversely affect the safety and security of the homeowner. We believe that emissions from our operations have been at levels that are protective of human health and welfare and did not interfere with the normal use and enjoyment of property. We also have taken and will continue to explore steps to further reduce our emissions. There's a key word in there that I want you to understand. We believe. It's not that we know. We believe that everything is perfectly fine and okay. I believe they're full of it. The TCQ did take enforcement action against Aruba Petroleum for permit violations, which was failing to file for that permit before they did that release, and emissions violation amount to $35,500. Now, I know to probably most of us $35,000 is a nice chunk of change. To Aruba Petroleum, it's a cost of doing business. And amounts to nothing more than a minor inconvenience. There have been dozens of violations found against Aruba Petroleum by the TCQ and the Railroad Commission of Texas, some of which have been waiting for more than a year for management approval. Waiting for management approval is governmental double talk for we have a campaign coming up, and we kind of need some funding for my political campaign, and the more that you contribute to my political campaign, the more that this will likely wait for my approval. As I said in the beginning, Texas' claim to fame is gas and oil. We are a gas and oil state. And there's a lot of people that are very proud of it. It does employ thousands of people. I am certainly grateful that a lot of these people have jobs. I don't have anything against gas and oil. I'm not opposed to gas and oil development. What I am for, and it very much, is it needs to be done responsibly, and it needs to be done with respect to people and our homes and our private property. My wife and I paid $250,000 for our house on 10 acres. It's a 4-bedroom house, hardwood floors and Mexican tile throughout on those 10 acres. It has been appraised as high as $340,000, and that was when the housing market actually started to decline rapidly. We had our house appraised again it was in December of 2010, or December 2009 rather, and as you might remember, on September 16th, 2009 is when Aruba Petroleum first showed up on our property. On September 16th, 2010, we had a little hearing down at the Wise County Appraisal's office. This is where we get to decide what our property taxes are. By a 5-0 ruling, now I know that all of you pay property taxes, and you get that little letter in the mail every year that says, here's what your property taxes are, and you have the opportunity to go down to the appraiser's office or something similar to that and protest. These people, I would tell you, I think are predisposed in telling you no. By a 5-0 ruling, they devalued our house by more than 2/3. Our house is worth $78,000. And the reason that it's worth $78,000 is because that's what the private appraisal said that it's worth. They were actually inclined to give it a value of 0. One of the board members for the tax appraisal is a realtor, and she is quoted as saying she does not think that she could sell, she wouldn't even bother to list this house because she didn't think that she could sell it at any price. One of the most important things that has come out in the last 6 months, knowing what you know, if you know nothing about Texas, we are gas and oil, we are a big gas and oil state. So here's a question for you. How bad of a gas and oil operator do you have to be to get the gas and oil state to sue you? You must be bad. The Texas State Attorney General is suing Aruba Petroleum for emissions violations. This is the same Attorney General that is also suing the EPA because they think the EPA is being too mean to the drillers. We have, in the last 6 months or so, we have drawn a lawsuit against Aruba Petroleum ourselves. Our neighbors have drawn suit against Aruba Petroleum, and we are going through what is known as the deposition phase, which their attorneys get to ask us a lot of ugly questions, and their executives are going through depositions this week. I've been in Pennsylvania this week since Sunday night. The chief financial officer had his deposition yesterday. And I'm not gonna, I don't need to go into all of the questions, but I will say that some of the questions that were being asked of him that they were leading up to was about the emissions and the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, and whether or not he received any of the emails from the Ruggieros, had he responded to any of them. Do you understand that they have an 11-year-old child that has been living next to this toxic waste facility for the last year and a half? And probably the question that has, now, I would tell you is that I've always believed that Aruba Petroleum has been nothing, if at least not arrogant. What I'm about to tell you convinces me that they are evil. The question directed to Aruba Petroleum's executive was, do you care if 11-year-old Riley Ruggiero gets cancer? He actually said, I do not. We're not talking about this political spin. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Chesapeake's little problem down in Bradford County, trying to minimize the damage, make this seem like it's not that big of a deal. How callous and heartless do you have to be to actually say, I do not care about your child and whether or not she contracts cancer? How dare you? I will just say it's a good thing for him that I'm in Pennsylvania and he's in Texas. Because if it were me sitting there instead of my wife, I might not be here today. I might be looking for a little bond money. So what I want to leave you with is what we started with, which is I've given you a glimpse of just some of the things that my family has been through. we are not the only family that has been through this. We are not the only family that has been through this with Aruba Petroleum. They have come out and worked on their well, their 2 wells. They have come out and worked on it virtually every weekend for the last year and a half. Not during the week when we're at work and school, on the weekends. I would tell you that a good reason for that is because they're mad at me. And this is their way of being childish and juvenile, and what I guess they refer to as part of being my good neighbor. You've seen just a very small glimpse. There have been literally dozens of leaks and spills and ongoing emissions. There has been countless times where we get up in the morning and go out to feed the horses, or get up in the morning to leave for school, and are overcome with gas odors. It gives you a headache. It causes nausea. If you're anything like my wife, who happens to be particularly susceptible to these things, it's an instant headache for her. It's not a headache that goes away very easily. Nothing like going to work with an upset stomach and a pounding headache. All the while wondering what it is that our child is being exposed to. And now we just heard that the chief financial officer for Aruba Petroleum couldn't care whether or not she not only gets sick, but could care less if she even contracts cancer. So clearly, Aruba Petroleum is more about money than they are about anything else. So the last thing that I want to leave you with is this. Calvin has a little bit different version of this. The truth, once awakened, never goes back to sleep. As Calvin would say, once you know, you can't not know. So what I would ask you to do tonight is, after we get through the presentation, I am not an expert on natural gas well development. I will say I know a lot more today than I did a year and a half ago. I would encourage you to ask questions, gain some understanding, and take it beyond Calvin and I to ask other people about what this process entails and what it looks like. The other thing that I want you to consider is, if there is a day, if any of you are property owners and you're thinking about leasing, and you get a knock at the door, and it's the happy guy with the bright white teeth and a checkbook in his hand, think of it this way. Shouldn't you be just a little bit suspicious when there's somebody coming to you wanting to give you money to sign a piece of paper? Especially if they are in a rush to get your signature on that paper as quickly as possible. I would tell you that leases, for the most part, are designed for the benefit of the guy that's wanting you to sign the lease and not you. There are, however, plenty of people that have made some money off of leasing their minerals. I didn't come here tonight to tell you not to lease your minerals. What I came here tonight to tell you is, this is the other side of the coin that you could potentially be looking at. If you are a landowner and you are in a position to lease your minerals, what I want you to consider is, please think of your families, and please think of your neighbors and the people that have to live with your decision, because you are accountable to that. You can't not be accountable to that. If you're the one making the deal, you're the one that's accountable. The leaseholder, in our question, we live in Texas, we have what is called split estate. The mineral right owner is dominant over the surface owner. We did not invite this. I didn't have a choice. We are serfs to the king because we are mere surface owners. The mineral right owner originally owned 920 acres of real property and retained the mineral rights. Over the last 30, 40 years or so, he's parceled off a good portion of that acreage in 40-acre lots. We got 10 from the 40 of the elderly folks that live across from us. he still owns 300 acres of real property. And because he's such a great neighbor to us and everybody else that lives out there, in the lease, he exempted 50 acres around his home from pipelines and gas well drilling, 200 feet for the rest of us. Now, I don't think that you have to be particularly smart. You don't have to know a whole lot about natural gas well development to conclude that if he exempted 5 times more property than we even own, I think he knew ahead of time that this wasn't going to be a good thing, and he didn't want it anywhere near him and his family. 200 feet for the rest of us. Why is that okay? So I hope that you'll spend a little bit of time with us tonight. Take a look at some of the pictures that we have in the back, and stick around and ask some questions, and hopefully we can get some answers for you. I have no secrets. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. If something I can do to find out, I'll be happy to do that. We have contact information. We have business cards. We have some sheets back in the back that has a lot of different ways to seek other sources of information. So I would encourage you very much to seek out other sources of information. Please just do not take my word for it, what I'm telling you tonight. If you have the slightest doubt that I have exaggerated, if you have the slightest suspicion that I have some other ulterior motive into giving you information that isn't really true, research it yourself. Get on the internet, type in my name, Tim Ruggiero. You will find all kinds of pages of stuff that has gone on. My testimony to the Environmental Protection Agency, my testimony to the TCEQ, my presentations that we've done in other parts of this state, presentations we've done elsewhere. So unlike the industry, this meeting is open to everybody, including industry, if there's anybody here tonight. And I just want to remind everybody I'm really not opposed to natural gas well development. We need the jobs. I understand there's some people out there that, that may be on the verge of losing their homes, or they haven't had a job in a long time, and somebody, a gas well operator comes by and they offer them a job, or they're offering this lease. I'm not saying don't work there. I'm not saying don't sign the lease. I'm saying be smart about it. Don't be in a rush. The industry's job is to get you to sign that lease as quickly as possible, and they're going to lie to you. They're going to lie to you, and they're going to mislead you. I have with me tonight, I don't know how many people have seen any of this prior. It's something that's been circulating around for the last couple of months or so. Is a few pages out of the landman's handbook that he apparently left behind. And one of the things that came out is, I don't know what operator it is, it actually says, try not to mislead them. Well, if it says try not to, doesn't that imply that if you have to ultimately mislead them in order to get to sign the lease, then do what you need to do? That's kind of how I read into it. Thank you very much for coming out tonight, folks. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. And I hope that you can take some of this information and do some good with it. Thank you very much.
That was a great job. Great job, Tim. Tim said one thing, that we're not against natural gas drilling, and I feel the same way. Last year I was up in Elmira, New York, and someone came up to me and handed me a bumper sticker that said, "I'm not opposed to the oil and gas industry. I'm opposed to being poisoned." And it was one of my citizens in Dish that made that quote, and I think that is the quote of the day. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dish. Some of you that have seen me speak before, this is quite a trimmed down version, so I'll go through it pretty quickly. Most of you know at least something about the town of Dish, and then we'll get into talking about shale tests, and then we'll have maybe a little question and answer session where we can where we can maybe answer some of your questions. So most people want to know initially, when I tell them that I'm from Dish, that I'm the mayor of Dish, is that where exactly is Dish? And so we're located 25 miles north of downtown Fort Worth. If anybody is familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, from my old home in Dish, I could actually see Texas Motor Speedway from my front door. We're a very small community, very small rural community. Most people had some property, not unlike a lot of communities around here in rural PA. We're about 2 square miles. We are just over 200 people in population. In our community, just outside of our borders, we have roughly another 300 people, so we're about 500 in our little community. And most of the people outside of the community, they don't get the Free Dish Network, but they do get a lot of our other services. They use our library and stuff like that. The industry will tell you that hydraulic fracturing has been being accomplished for 60 years, and they're right to some extent. They don't tell you the whole story, but the shale gas, the shale rock hydraulic fracturing, which is called slick water fracturing, was developed about 15 miles west of Dish, probably about 20 miles south of where Tim lives, right in the Barnett Shale, and that was in the late 90s. So we've had drilling in our area for a long time. So we're, what is that, about 10 years ahead of you all, I would say. So from where Tim lives to Dish, I could literally throw a rock and hit the next pad site and make it all the way to his house. And he lives, it's probably 20 miles or so from Dish as the crow flies. So Dish was originally incorporated as Clark in 2000. And then as was stated in the intro, we changed our name to Dish in exchange for 10 years of Free Dish Network. And so everybody in the town gets Free Dish Network until 2015. You guys might have heard of that. There was a lot of media coverage of that. It was comparable to when Apple released the iPod. So Dish got their money's worth out of that too, and we've done different things with them. We're a very small town. We have a very small budget. I always strive to keep the taxes as low as I possibly could. We had a unique thing when, as mayor of Dish, I ran the town kind of like most people run their households. You figure out how much money you've got, and then you figure out what you're going to do with it, as opposed to figuring out what you want and then taxing to meet that. So we had a very small budget of around $70,000. We are in the middle of the Barnett Shale, both me and Tim, which is similar to the Marcellus Shale, which you have here in Pennsylvania. The Barnett Shale is about 5,000 square miles in size. It's in North Texas. It covers about 23 counties. It's known as a tight gas reservoir. And the only way it can produce natural gas is through hydraulic fracturing. The same as your shale play here. As of November 29th last year, there was a total of 14,574 wells in the Barnett Shale. There's about another 3,000 that were permitted at that time. The oil and gas industry on their investor pages believe that there could be at least 100,000 wells in the Barnett Shale. Now the Barnett Shale is about 1/5 the size of the Marcellus Shale. So just doing the rough math, you may be looking at 500,000 wells in the Marcellus Shale. So I'm not sure what part of, how much of the state that is, but you're probably looking at several 100,000 wells in Pennsylvania that go into the Marcellus. And you have some other formations such as the Utica and other ones that I would suspect that they would be going into eventually. That's probably not going to happen next year. It's going to be something that's gradual. And it may take 20 years, it may take 30 years, it may take 50 years for them to have that many. But I would bet that their plans is to have that many at some point. So since we're right out on the edge of the kind of urban sprawl, and we had some open land, we were a very popular route for pipelines coming out of the Barnett Shale that transported the gas to market. And so we had 11 big, massive, what they call transmission lines, 36-inch lines. So there was about a dozen of those that go through the community. And there's associated processing that goes along with that. So they had to build a dozen compressors as well as a gas processing facility. So we more or less have a refinery of sorts that was constructed on the southern edge of our community. So we've got this big infrastructure in place right now, but if they drill 6 times more wells, they're going to have more production. They're going to have more pipelines. Let's say they do put 500,000 wells in the Marcellus Shale. How many pipelines is that going to take to get the gas out of here? How many processing facilities is that going to be? Where are they all going to go? We have pretty much every aspect of drilling inside of Dish. We have drilling, where they take the gas out of the ground. We have processing, where they remove all of the impurities. They odorize the gas, and they compress the gas. So it literally could be taken out of the ground in Dish, and by the time it leaves, it's ready for your kitchen stove. So, as alluded to, in our two square miles, we have about 18 wells, and then we've got 50 or so just outside of our corporate limits. Some would refer to us as a sacrifice zone. This is the compression station. And over on the right side of your screen, you'll see a tree line, and that's where the compressors start. That tree line is actually the corporate limits of Dish. So the very first compressor was built literally a few feet outside of our corporate limits. So they wouldn't have to abide by any of our ordinances or any of the restrictions that we had in place. And then the town kind of makes a horseshoe area, so there's kind of a dead spot where they built most of them, but as the site continued to grow, it actually goes back into the town, and you can see the ones that are completely enclosed are painted a little, off color, neutral colors. Those are actually in the town. And in Texas, you can control the aesthetics, the noise. That's about all you can control as a municipality. I mean, there's a few other things. We had them put bushes around it and things like that, but there isn't a whole lot you can do as a municipality. So we did what we could do, and we got them to enclose them. The ones that are outside, they were actually in the documentary Gasland. I don't know if anybody's seen that movie. You can see how noisy those things were. They produce about 90 decibels or so of noise. The ones that are enclosed are much quieter. You've seen that big site, which is essentially one site. However, there were 5 individual companies and 5 individual permits that were on that facility. And in Texas, they have what they call a permit by rule. And so if you don't reach a certain emissions threshold, then all you have to do is fill out an application, and you just send that application in. It's an administrative process. There's nothing further that has to be done. And so each of these companies did a permit by rule. So individually, they fall under the requirements of the permit by rule. However, collectively, they're well above the restrictions in the permit by rule. And volatile organics, they're double what would be allowed under permit by rule. Now, when I first approached the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality about this, they literally had no idea that they had permitted 5 of these facilities essentially on the same site. They had no idea. Since then, obviously, that's pretty embarrassing for a regulatory agency to not have any idea what they've done. So they've actually changed the rule to where you have to take in account some of the things that are within a certain area. I think it's a quarter mile or something from your facility. It's a certain distance, and I can't remember exactly what it is. Of course, that doesn't help us. That would only be for new permits. This is a exhaust from a thermal oxidizer. Tim actually had one of these in his front yard for a little while. The first thing that was the problem was noise. That's the first thing you notice because that's pretty apparent, and these things are loud. As the site continued to grow and they started installing the processing equipment especially, the odor started to become very strong and very intrusive. And so we began to complain, and nobody was listening. Our state regulatory agencies wouldn't listen. The operators themselves wouldn't listen. Our complaints were literally falling on deaf ears. So before we move on, does anybody notice anything strange about those trees? Yeah, you ever see these fence lines around here out in the rural areas where these trees grow up? Well, literally, from fence line to fence line on this compressor site, all the trees had died or were dying. So again, that was one of those things that raised some ears. Maybe we've got something going on here. So we got everybody involved, got a little media coverage. So the industry, to be good neighbors, decided they were going to do an air study. And they told me, as the mayor of the town, that they would find the source of these odors and they would fix them. Has anybody ever heard of a glycol dehydrator? The gas doesn't come out of the ground as the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. It goes through a process. And so what this does, there's various forms, but the cheapest form is glycol, and it's boiling glycol. The gas goes through the boiling glycol. The glycol traps the moisture, and it's above boiling, so the moisture will boil off. So any chemicals in the gas will essentially be boiled off into your air. Now, every single person should know that who's working in the oil and gas industry. They should know what I'm complaining about when I'm complaining about odor, because they just installed these glycol dehydrators. They smell horrible. But they did a test for methane, and they stuck a gas detection unit in the back of an SUV and drove around for a couple of hours, said everything was fine. Their study said no natural gas leaks were found that would be detectable to the human nose. So this was all a figment of our imagination. If you did a public information request for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for odor complaints in the town of Dish, you would literally get hundreds of them from the residents of Dish. And so this was our response. So we did our own air study. And we come up with something a little bit different. Now, I was expecting to find methane or something of the sorts. Instead, I found a bunch of other chemicals. So our study had a quote that said, laboratory results confirm the presence of multiple recognized and suspected human carcinogens in the fugitive air emissions present on several locations tested in the town of Dish. All of these were taken on private property all the way around that big massive facility. Now the only one that did not have an exceedance of the effect screening levels was the upwind location. So that gives us a good idea of where it was coming from. So a total of 16 chemicals were found above the effect screening levels, and several toxins exceeded both short-term and long-term ESLs. So does everybody know what an ESL is? It's an effect. The effect screening level is a level that if you go above that level, it could possibly cause a negative health impact. For example, benzene, the long-term effect screening level is 1.4 parts per billion. And parts per billion, that's pretty small. It don't have to be very much of that, but that's what they've determined. The short term is 180 parts per billion. So that's a little bit higher, but if you're exposed for more than an hour. So it's very short term. It's based on a 35-year-old healthy male who's exposed to these chemicals in an occupational setting. Not children, not pregnant mothers, not people susceptible. I couldn't understand why we would base it on that, but the fact of the matter is that if you're a pregnant mother or a child, you're not supposed to be exposed to this. So, you heard a little bit about my story as in the intro. I've lived in Dish longer than I've lived any place since my childhood home, since I grew up in the oil fields at Oklahoma. It's the only home that my children ever knew. My children went to school there. My children had their friends there. And so it was a very tough decision to want to move from there. About this time last year, another thing that we have, if I could back up just a little bit, is we have a permanent monitor installed by the state that measures the contaminants in our air around the clock. I don't always believe the accuracy, but it does tell you if it has spikes or if it's flatlined. And so we have these odors that I tell you about. Well, we would notice a spike in those odors on the meter whenever we would have these strong odors. And so my children began getting nosebleeds in the middle of the night that coincided with these spikes and with these odor events. And I have two boys, 6 and 8. You know, boys are rough and tumble, and you know they're always wrestling, and they want a rough house. So they bang themselves up. But this was happening in the middle of the night when they're sleeping. And the week preceding Memorial Day last year, almost every night, one of the children were getting up with nosebleeds. And it was at the same time that we were seeing these odors. And on Memorial Night, my youngest son had a very, very bad nosebleed. And these are pretty disturbing, you know. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's crying. He's woke up in the middle of the night. You know, he's got blood on his hands. It's wiped down the walls. He gets in bed with his brother. It gets all over the house. And I woke up the next morning, and as I was leaving, my wife said that was it. And so we made the decision right there that we were going to put our house on the market. And so we did, and we actually managed to sell our house. We took a loss on it, but that was something we had to do. You can't risk your children's health. You just simply cannot do that as a parent. And if you think something's wrong, you have to take the steps that you have to take to get out of that situation, or that's the way that we felt anyway. People ask me, well, did you disclose? In the contract, I handwrote hand wrote, that the buyer will watch the documentary Gasland provided by the seller. And they initialed that they watched Gasland and still bought the house. So I've moved from Dish. Technically, I'm still the mayor. I will be for about 2 more weeks, May 14th. I will no longer be the mayor. I'll be the former mayor. And so a lot of people have asked me, well, what's next? What are you going to do next? And one of the things that we're here to talk about tonight is shale test. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to do and put my time into. I'm going to try and do more public speaking, get out and do this kind of stuff. You know, we may do this tour of this area once a year. And I go to other places. I was just out in West Texas. There's some photos back there of West Texas a few weeks ago, talking to a group out there. I'm going to do some videos, and I just started a website, calvintillman.com. We're going to post some videos on there where I'm going to talk in depth, individually, about the subjects that I believe are pertinent to situations like me and situations like Tim's. People have asked me, are you going to run for higher office? You know, frankly, I don't consider myself a politician, and I don't want to offend anybody who's a politician in the room, so I won't go any further than that. But at the time, I do not intend to run for higher office. I didn't intend to run for mayor. You get fed up with a situation and you get involved, and you never know where that leads. So that's a little bit about what's in my future on this subject. I'm not going away. I'm gonna stay on as an unpaid consultant for the town of Dish and try and get them through their situation. And so I'm not going to abandon those folks. We're going to try and get that situation as best as we can. So we'll get on and we'll talk a little bit about Shale Test here, and then we'll have some question and answer sessions. Shale Test is a nonprofit organization. We are physically sponsored by an organization called Earthworks. And what that means is that all your donations are tax deductible. And we have put together a pretty good group of advisors to help us in this process. I'm not a scientist. Tim's not a scientist. But we have people who are scientists who are helping us, and they've helped us write our procedures and determine how we're going to do this stuff. Some of you may have heard of Wilma Subra. She's a MacArthur Genius Award winner. She won that award for her work down in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. She lives down in Louisiana. Very amazing lady. She is in her mid-60s, and I think she sleeps less than I do. I mean, she just plugs along, and she just always helps everybody who asks her. She's just a wonderful person. Chris Nidell is an environmental attorney who's also a chemical engineer, and we've made friends with him through this, and we've got discussions, and he's actually going to join us a little bit later this week. He's out of Washington, D.C., and so he helps us. He does some testing for us. Sherelle Blazer, an atmospheric chemist with experience in toxicology and public health. And has anybody heard of Josh Fox? So Josh is, of course, the producer of Gasland, and he helps us out too. Most folks don't know that Josh actually has run a nonprofit organization for the last 15 years. So he's been very helpful on the nonprofit side of this. Some of the equipment that we have to use, has anybody seen a FLIR video where it shows the volatile organics? We've got a video coming up. Chris Nidell, his law firm, actually has a portable gas chromatograph that can analyze water and air and soil. And so we can use that as a screening mechanism. Stainless steel suma canisters. It's one of the most accurate ways to measure chemicals in air. And so these go, you can take from a 30-second sample to a 48-hour sample. And so these are very, very good to do air testing with. And we also will be using nationally certified labs. We have a number of those agreements in place, and so we also have that capability. These are the things that we can test: air, soil, water, groundwater, which is your wells, surface water, which is your rivers, streams, lakes, etc. Here is the clear video, and this was actually taken with the camera that we have access to, and this is actually right near Tim's house. Not the well that's on his property, but it's not too far away. And so that shows you the volatile organics. That's what it's looking at. It's a FLIR gas finder, forward-looking infrared, but it doesn't just detect heat, it detects volatile organics. And then that lets you know where you want to put this. So the testing itself will be accomplished by trained volunteers, and you know, it doesn't take a graduate degree in science to work one of these. It's actually pretty simple. If you were to get your DEP, or if you come to Texas, we'll call out the TCEQ just to show you. What shows up is not a scientist, you know, and nothing against those folks. I mean, you know, most of the boots on the ground in the organizations are trying to do something good. It's the suits up at the top that prevent them from doing that. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that they're not scientists, so it doesn't take rocket science to work one of these, and it doesn't take rocket science to take a sample of somebody's water. We have volunteers in 3 states, including the state of Pennsylvania. And is Frank still in the room? There's Frank waving in the back. Frank's one of our volunteers here in Pennsylvania. He lives, yep. He lives over in Hot Bottom, and Frank spent quite a bit of time down in Texas. He came down when we introduced shale tests down there. So Frank's been very good volunteer. We're trying to get volunteers in other states. This all started about a year ago. Me and Tim were having a drink after a presentation over in Pittsburgh, and I threw this idea out there. I guess he had enough drinks in him that he agreed to it. So what we said that night, essentially on a dinner napkin, was that we're going to do this. We're going to do this whether we get a nickel from the outside or not. We'll do this on some level. And so regardless of whether we raise any money or not, we're going to do this. We may be only able to help 5 people this year, or 10 people this year. I don't know what that number is. But we're going to do it, and we're going to keep doing it. However, we do accept donations. And if you would like to donate, you can make a check payable to Earthworks. That's our physical sponsor. There's our mailing address. You can go to shaletest.org for the and do it online. Do an online payment. And we actually have a phone number, but I can't remember the phone number. But we have business cards that have our contact information on it. And so if you grab one of those business cards, you can just call us. We should put that on there. We should add that to the presentation. We also need people to help us take the samples. And there's a variety of other things that we need people to do. If you've noticed, while Tim was talking, I was taking pictures of him. And while I'm talking, he was taking pictures of me. So we're kind of our own PR group here. So if someone has a scientific background and would like to lend us support, we would really appreciate that. If people want to help out and host a fundraiser, we're certainly not opposed to coming back up here and doing a fundraiser if someone would like to fundraise in a certain area. A lot of people ask, well, I don't want to raise money for this area and have you spend money in another area. And we understand that. And we will spend essentially everything that we can in the area where we collect the money. Certainly if a fundraiser's set up in that area. So we'll try and do all we can do to spend the money in the area where it's raised, because that's only fair. There's some other things we need. We need people who would go out and take a sample. If someone calls an hour from here, and it's 2 or 3 hours for Frank to get there, that's not all that convenient. And so it'd be good if we had people around the state, around the country, that we could call to go take a sample of somebody's air or somebody's water. This Suma canister, I didn't carry this Suma canister on the airplane with me. I had it mailed to Carol's house. And so we can do that. We can have this mailed to your house. You can go take a sample. You put it back in a box. It comes with a UPS sticker. You slap the sticker back on it and you ship it back. So it's not it's not a real difficult process. It's pretty easy. Here's some of our contact information. We can leave that up there for a few minutes, and we maybe can start some question and answer sessions. There is these sheets right here. This is printed off, and it's on contact sheets, and they're back there on the table, as well as the shale test fact sheet. There's some of our contact information on there. A couple of my websites, the shale test site. There's a new group that's just started called Citizen Shale Advisors, and inevitably you come to one of these and we just show you what we showed you, and someone walks up to you afterwards and says, well, if you think I held out a little bit longer, you think they'd pay a little more? And so if you're going to go sign a lease, you better get some help. Otherwise, you're going to be taken advantage of. You're not going to get what you think you're getting. And once you sign that, you've signed away a big portion of your rights on that property. And so you need to make sure you understand what you're signing. Strangely enough, I told you I grew up in the Oklahoma oil fields, and I actually legally own the property that I grew up on. And oddly enough, about a month ago, a landman came up to the door and tried to get my mom to sign a lease. My father's deceased. And so I'm dealing with the landman right now myself. At the end of the day, they have forced pooling in Oklahoma. There may not be anything I can do about it. But I think I'm going to have a little fun with it in the process. So I have the lease at my house, and it's a very basic lease. It basically says you sign over everything regarding your minerals to us. And they even give you one of those checks where if you sign the check and you cash it, then that executes the deal.